Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to Startup Boston. My name's Andy, and I'm one of the organizers for this event. This is my third year doing it, so it's become a fun annual tradition for me. It's really a joy to get to do this and plan it out for quite a number of months and then finally see it all come to fruition. So just a little announcement. This session is School's Out. If you were not here for this session, you were here for one of the other ones on this screen, you can go ahead and go to the agenda and go to those events right now. If you're still here and you haven't clicked away, that's great. We're super excited to have you. This session is going to be a blast. We have some really fantastic speakers with some really fantastic experience. And so because they have so much experience to give, and we can't ask literally everything you were thinking of, we'd love for you to ask questions. We really encourage that. That's why we have a specific Q&A tab over to your right in your chat. So if you go to text Q&A, both me and Sean will see those. Sean's going to be taking all the questions at the end and picking a few of those to give as questions to our panelists. Also, we have an awesome social media competition floating around. So just pay attention to what our speakers are saying. If you find a really great quote that you really liked, go ahead and use the hashtag SBW2021. I'll put that in the chat. And you can be entered to win one of $500 gift cards to Black-owned Boston businesses. So we're really excited to get this panel going, and I'll turn over to Sean, our moderator, to get it kicked off. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Andy. Yes, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this Startup Boston Week 2021. As Andy said, my name is Sean Awaromi. I'm a postdoctorate fellow at the Polson School of Applied Sciences and Engineering. And it is my great pleasure to both welcome and facilitate our illustrious panel of experts to discuss this wonderful topic of transitioning R&D from academia to your startup. So I'll have the panelists introduce themselves. So why don't we begin with Camille?
Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing well on this afternoon in Boston. My name is Camille Martin, and I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of Ceasefire Skincare, which is a Boston-based startup that's really positioning to bring to market new materials to address cosmetic and chronic skin conditions using ingredients inspired by cephalopods, octopus, squid, and cuttlefish. Happy to talk more about how we were able to really study these animals and find our way to skincare. And just overall, very happy to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Camille. And Adam.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here as well. It's a pleasure. And before I talk a little bit about myself, I just wanted to say I'm a big fan of Camille's. So I'm really happy to be on a panel with her. My background is basically first half of my career, say about the first 14, 15 years of my career, I was a serial entrepreneur in the startup world, mostly in the Silicon Valley. Then kind of in the next 12 to 13 years of my career, I jumped to the other side of the fence and was in the dark world of corporate leadership. And was on the leadership teams of about 4 large Fortune 500s, and then about 6-7 years ago or so, went into venture capital, and we'll be happy to kind of expand on that later during the panel.
Excellent, thank you both. And we have a third panelist who may join at some point once some technical issues are resolved. So,
and Sean, let's not forget to take an opportunity to hear your background.
Of course, why not? Yes, so I'm, thank you very much for that, Adam. Yes, I'm a postdoctoral researcher working in wearable devices for various applications, and currently working on a translational project as part of a team at Harvard University and the Wyss Institute. So that's kind of my both academic and translational background. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. Okay. Wonderful. So I do just want to begin by giving a sense of, or giving our audience a sense of where you guys are at and where you guys are coming from So perhaps if I could start with you, Camille, and you could give like a kind of a genesis story and a sense of if there was a aha moment or a particular inflection point that kind of got you on your journey, or if it was a series of those, and just kind of talking about that. And then Adam, I'll come to you after that.
Sounds good. So I'm from Long Island, Strong Island, New York. So I'm a Yankee in Boston. Growing up, I've always loved fashion, beauty, and just going to the city, going to Manhattan to museums and a lot of shows with my family has always been something that I enjoyed. When I was in high school, I was also very, very interested in science. In fact, in my junior year, I was taking chemistry and I used to be balancing equations while on the phone with my best friend. At the time, I was applying to colleges and I thought I wanted to study meteorology. I was also like interested in the weather. And so I started looking at schools where you could study meteorology, and a lot of them were in the Midwest. And I was like, absolutely not. I don't want to go to college in the Midwest. So I had been taking chemistry, and I literally Googled like careers in chemistry, and I saw that you can become a cosmetic chemist. So I decided I wanted to be a cosmetic chemist. I ended up going to Andrews University, which is in Michigan. So I did find my way to the Midwest. Funnily. And within the first 3 weeks at being at Andrews, I was able to start research. So actually the week of orientation, I met with one of my advisors and they encouraged me to do research early. And I was saying, okay, maybe when I'm a senior in college, right now I'm just starting at my first week of school. But Dr. Desmond Murray, he had a program, Best Early, which is Building Excellence in Science and Technology, which was a program for high schoolers in the Benton Harbor area to be able to get exposure to college level research, as well as college level classes starting as early as their 10th grade year. And so he said, I have these high schoolers who are in the lab, so you certainly should be in the lab. So within the first 3 weeks, he had designed a project that involved me doing synthesis of fragrances and dyes, since I had an interest in cosmetics. And from that, it kind of just spiraled where every semester I was doing research and every summer I was doing a program, NSF, research experience for undergraduates. And so for me, the next step to go towards my PhD was pretty straightforward. I realized that there were a lot of opportunities that were associated with having an advanced degree. And I thought it would put me in a great positioning to get a job at a multinational beauty company that was back on the East Coast, back in New York, New Jersey, where I really wanted to be. When I went to Northeastern, I actually started in a totally different research area where I was studying medicinal plants and doing genetic engineering of these botanicals that could be used as new ingredients for skincare. Upon probably the third year, 3 out of maybe 5 years of a PhD, I made a big change to switch groups completely as the project started to move more towards plant physiology and less towards application. I would say this was the turning point for me because I decided prematurely, before I even had a new group lined up, that I was going to enter into the cosmetic industry, either by just getting a master's and directly going in, or applying for other jobs like trying to be a patent agent, eventually becoming a patent attorney, saving enough money, and then starting my own brand. I had all of these plans. So I just decided I'm going to stop this program because I've already invested so much time and I really want to go into the industry right now. I told myself and maybe one or two of my friends that the next thing that I do has to be directly related to cosmetics or have to be providing me resources where I'll be able to start my own brand. I had one colleague who was a couple years older than me, and she encouraged me to look at other labs on campus before making the big decision. And so I interviewed a few professors, and one of them, I went into their office, and they were telling me all about their project, biomaterials, new animal systems. And then she said, but I really have this interest to really apply this new material for skincare and cosmetics. I didn't say it, she did. So I said, okay, this is definitely the move that I wanted to make, and I felt like it was a risk worth taking. And so I jumped into Layla Daravi's group in July of 2017 and really hit the ground running. Right now, I had already put in 2-3 years on a different project. And so I was really trying to work on an accelerated path. And then in September, I joined the National Science Foundation Innovation Corps program. at Northeastern, which helps graduate students take technologies from the lab to the shelf. And through that experience, we really started to fit in our technology and start thinking about some commercial applications. And within a couple of weeks, we had our first provisional patents. This was like a snowball effect. It was like first a snowflake when I joined her lab, and then it's just got the ball rolling. And ever since then, we've never stopped. And so my co-founder is my former PI, Layla Jaravi, and it all started from those moments. A big risk, but it has been really a rewarding experience so far.
Wow, yeah, thank you for that really full description, so we can really get a sense of where you're coming from. Adam, I'm curious because you operate in the realm that many of us who have either heard about startups or are interested in startups would consider the other side of the table. So I'm wondering, was that ever your aspiration? Did you find yourself thinking that you would work on the side of the folks that fund, especially given your own entrepreneurial journey?
Not in the least. Not in the least. So I got to tell you, if I rewind, my career, I was like set on being an academician. And so, and my I would say my journey was very serendipitous, but when I look back at it now, it all makes sense. But at the time, it certainly didn't. So let me take you through that. So when I first graduated with my bachelor's degree, I took a little bit of a different course. I didn't go straight through academia. So after my undergrad, I went to Silicon Valley, caught the startup bug, and was a serial entrepreneur for a while. And I was fortunate enough, and I was very compelled, by the way, with anything that has to do with innovation. For me, it wasn't money; it was R&D that makes the world go round. And so I had always this fascination with innovation and everything to do with it. So during kind of the mid '80s in Silicon Valley, that was the vibe, right? It was an incredible time to witness and be part of that ecosystem. And what ended up happening was that I got into this algorithm that I was fortunate enough to have each of the 4 or 5 startups I was involved in all exit. But after each exit, I'd basically go back to school. So after my first one was acquired, I decided to go back to school and did a degree that had nothing to do with my career. It was just a personal interest to me. It was chaos theory. Has nothing to do with hardcore engineering, nothing to do with life sciences, but it was still very steeped in innovation, because the whole thesis I was working on was, how can you use nonlinear thinking to energize the innovation process? So that was what I did. And when I finished that, I went back to the Silicon Valley, did a few more startups, a few more exits, left again. Then I went to do more graduate studies after the exits. That was my algorithm. So I went back, and by the way, as a peripheral thought to share with you, that really for me helped me a lot, because bouncing back and forth between the two helped sharpen 2 things. When I was in industry, I felt I was fresh-minded with technology at the cutting edge. When I was in academia, I was very objective-oriented. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't have to go through kind of finding myself time. I go into every degree. I knew what my thesis was. I knew what the research plan. I had a Gantt chart for my I went in. I'm ready to go. I was ready to execute. So it really helped sharpen my thinking on both sides of the fence. But in any case, after my PhD, or I should say during my PhD, I still wanted to go out into academia. That was still my long-term goal. Love teaching, love dissemination of knowledge, working with smart people in an academic environment. But what I noticed was, it was at a time when there was a time when teaching was what academia was about. Then, of course, it went to publishing. And I was there at a time when it transitioned from publishing to raising money. That's how I got tenure. And I started to think, well, heck, if I need to raise money anyway, you know what? I'm going to go back and be an entrepreneur. so I'm going to do it in the private sector. So that's what I did. And so when I after the PhD, I decided to go back and just sharpen my career in the entrepreneurial world. So I did a few more startups, got a few more exits under my belt, and then decided, I'd like to now experience the exact opposite of what I'm doing. Instead of starting something small and trying to develop to a certain level of scalability, let me run large-scale businesses and acquire instead of being acquired. And so that's when I jumped over to the other side of the fence, and that's exactly what I was doing. I was running large-scale businesses, and I was acquiring companies and integrating them, and then scaling them up. So did that for about 12 or 13 years. But as I was always in every moment I was in a large corporate setting, I was bent on debunking the myth that a large corporate couldn't be innovative. It bothered me. It was self-imprisonment, that they had to be slow and lethargic and weighed down with undue process. So I even when I was in the large corporate setting, I was bent on creating structures, little startup environments within large corporate R&D centers. Fast forward, came a time when I was selling off one of my last companies. I was really getting the entrepreneurial bug to kind of return to my roots. But instead of just doing one company, I thought, hey, it would be great to leverage the experiences I've had now in both sides of the fence, both sides of the M&A fence, to help entrepreneurs that were younger and brighter than me really change the world. And joined up with a good friend of mine who I've known for about 20-something years, and we started Material Impact together. And so that was really my motivation to go into venture. It wasn't to go into venture. It was really to help build companies at scale and leverage the experiences that I've gained throughout my career to younger and brighter entrepreneurs.
Thank you both so very much. Your backstories, I think, will really help significantly enrich this discussion. I've got tons of follow-up questions, but first thing will be first. So you both have experience within academia, which I would imagine many of the people on this call also do, and then also out of academia in many different guises and variations. So I guess the question would be, what are some of the biggest challenges in transitioning? And maybe more, Camille, I can put that at your feet. And then also, what are some of the biggest differences between kind of an industrial setting, an academic setting and a startup setting? And that can be to kind of both of you and also, to you, Adam. So let's start with yourself, Camille.
So I would say prior to starting a company, my pathway was pretty structured. And I mean, granted, when you're in a PhD, there's some wiggle room in regards to when you'll finish, but it's pretty straightforward. You take classes, you do research, you write publications, and then you graduate, and then you move on. When I was starting the company, for us, it was a little bit of a different experience, especially for our pre-seed, which is where our recent round that we raised, where we got capital and then we had to start from scratch. So we actually were able to close our deal. I would say everything was in the bank January 2020. And so this is my first time being a founder. Really excited to be able to have capital to be able to really expand and further de-risk our technology. But what is the very first step that you take in doing so? For us, it was manufacturing. this is something that we were trying to figure out, not only just on a baseline when everything was normalized in maybe February, but then also when we witnessed and experienced this disruption in March that really shook up the global economy and the way that people are thinking about doing business. So it was, for me, the transition from going where we had a lab at the university where you have all the materials that you need, and you can read research papers, and you're kind of working within the confines of an area that's been established, to a totally new area where you now have to think about, how can you scale this? How can you build this? How are you going to prioritize your efforts moving forward, so that you're able to not only collect meaningful data, but are also able to push forward your product pipeline? So for me, I think it was just a transition from having a really set path and like knowing that there's been many people who have gone through the exact same pathway as you, whereas for your company, or like for our company, while there are other startups that have started like ours, to solve our unique problem with this technology, these materials, was totally new. We've been able to, in the early stage, pull in such great advisors and mentors. So that was something that was really crucial for us, to be able to not only be able to meet our milestones in such a challenging year, but really exceed them. And so I can say that we were really fortunate to be able to be within a network of so many great experts and industry personnel that was able to guide us very early on. So I would say the biggest challenge is going from environment of certainty to a startup environment where there's so much uncertainty and so much unknown. Like, you don't even know what you don't know, especially as like a first-time founder. And the good thing is that, like, by pulling in the right mentors, they can help guide you, but there's still, each step you're learning something new, which is really exciting, but also somewhat daunting. So I would say the uncertainty was challenging, but also one of the most rewarding parts is just being able to know that each week, each quarter, we're facing new problems or new situations where it's able to really grow us as individuals, and also allow us to shape the organization that we're building from the ground up.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And yes, so many points to touch on that. I did first want to come to you, Adam, and just get your perspective from someone who is, mentoring and coaching, and someone who has been in the trenches. You've got maybe a 3-phase difference. You know what it's like to be a graduate student, you know what it's like to be in a startup, and you know what it's like to be in a VC. And maybe you can talk about some of those differences.
Sure. Maybe I'll focus on one portion of what you were saying. I think, when you talk about, first of all, what are some of the differences between, let's say, trying to create innovation as a grad student, and then doing so as an entrepreneur, doing so in the large corporate setting, doing so from a venture perspective. You're right. They're all different stakeholders here of one cycle, and they each have their piece. They each have their place. And I think the trick as an ecosystem is for us to figure out how to optimize each of these pieces. Right. This is really the trick that we all as being patrons of that ecosystem have to figure out. So in the place of, let's say, academia, we'll start with that. I think we're seeing now a lot more focus on mission-oriented, objective-oriented, application-oriented research, and I think that's great, because there are real demands in the world today that I think need to guide a lot of work. And of course, there's always going to be a place for basic research that is mechanistic, but I think that in the face of a time right now where we don't have the same level of government spending that we had back in the post-World War I, World War II era, where a very large percentage of GDP was put into basic sciences, and different kinds of research that have basically led to a lot of the things that we've now built upon, like the Human Genome Project and GPS and microelectronics. A lot of that stuff was really funded back in the post World War II era. And right now, if you look at the amount of GDP that's spent towards R&D, it's a fraction of that. And so academia has a very special role to play in being able to not just do basic research, but very objective-oriented R&D that almost takes the place of some of that government-sponsored R&D. And of course, it still needs to be sponsored through some government non-dilutive financing, but it also gets sponsored through strategic relationships with corporates and with and venture partnerships and so forth. So there's a place right now for I would say very objective oriented academic research. In the large corporate world, what you have to leverage there is just muscle, core capability muscle. You paint on a very, very large canvas with a large palette of colors. And it's not just about the money. It's about having all those capabilities housed under one roof and being able to leverage those from the perspective of voice of customer, right? Because that's where the strength is for a large corporate, is to have a very clear line of sight to customers, to understand basically the market, and be able to guide the development from that perspective. And then, of course, on the venture and the entrepreneurial setting, it's all about focus and skin in the game, right? Laser focus and this will and passion to do what has not been done before. That both academic research which can be a little bit more, I would say, nebulous, and large corporate research and development, which can be a lot more, again, because of the leverage, it loses the focus, right? Because leverage and focus are mortal enemies sometimes. So then you put all those ingredients together and you have the ragu sauce, right? It's perfect. So that, I think what it's really all about is to take all those differences and optimize them towards the ecosystem of innovation as a whole.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that response. And that brings me very nicely onto my next question, which I'll shoot at Camille. How have you balanced this tension that Adam very nicely described between this more traditional, maybe historic paradigm or academic paradigm of, innovation and creation and knowledge generation for knowledge generation's sake, and something that is very specific and very objective oriented and has a customer face in front of it? Has that transition been easy? Has it felt like, killing a part of yourself? I imagine attendees here may wonder about that and what that has felt like to make that transition.
So for us, our founding story at Northeastern, I was very fortunate to work with Layla, who had a very entrepreneurial spirit about her. So when I came into the group, I had already been a part of different trade associations within the cosmetic and skincare industry. And so when we started to identify the functionality of our materials that fit in with the scope of that industry, she was very, very supportive about with me taking different courses and attending different conferences and meetings. So I was directly interfacing with the industry, pulling back the data and the type of research that is necessary to get certain claims that would allow us to fit our technology into this space. And so it was a very, very unique pairing to have an entrepreneurial graduate student with a professor that had similar interests. And that really allowed us to be able to be super focused not only on the innovation, but also on the next steps towards commercialization. I can say that's not super common, at least not from what I hear amongst my other graduate student colleagues. And so for us, it was really good to be able to map out how could we be able to make the most out of the data we are collecting in regards to the academic endeavor. So making sure we're pushing out the publications, but still something that is palatable for the industry. Moving forward, when we started the company, Layla remained as a professor at Northeastern and continues to be our innovation hub, where we are now being able to navigate different partnership opportunities or licensing opportunities of the technology that comes out of the lab. So being able to maintain that pipeline and engagement with academia is something that's core to the structure of our business as it stands.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I'm sure many of our attendees will maybe be breathing a sigh of relief to know that to go down the academic or the startup route doesn't mean completely divorcing oneself from the academic ecosystem. Adam, as in your role as kind of, because I think many people don't necessarily realize that as a funder, you're also a mentor. That's part of the resource that you provide to early stage startups and startups in general. Camille kind of hinted at this, that her experience isn't necessarily the most common. So do you encounter startups that have these tensions, maybe with the PI or with the institution, and what are the ways that you kind of advise to navigate that, if that is something that comes up on your radar at all?
Yeah, no, thanks for that lead. I think, first of all, I'll just comment on something you said in the intro here to the question, and that is, I like to think of ourselves not as VCs, but as company builders who happen to have a fund. That's the way I like to characterize myself. So as such, you're absolutely right. It's really all about working with entrepreneurs, not just providing resourcing. And like I said, that was actually even the initial motivation for going into the venture world in the first place. And so you're absolutely right. In terms of some of the things that we spend time with, especially with inception-based companies that are spinning out of an academic environment, there are lots of challenges that we can probably get into later in the session here. But in particular, with respect to the as you characterize it, the healthy tension with the PIs and so forth. The trick, I think, really is that there are many, I would say, academic professors who are very entrepreneurial, and they'll get this. There are some who aren't. That's just not their nature. And so in those settings, it's really important to be able to have them express their ownership and their skin in the game in ways that are different than they would as an academic project. They'll have to understand that their ownership in the company needs to transform along with the company. The entrepreneurial professors get that. They start to transform from being the PI to kind of a CTO, right? Founding CTO, to then maybe a very strongly affiliated consultant, because they know that as the company evolves, their role changes. So it's important to be able to have the kinds of rapports and discussions with academic professors that, in the name of the success of the technology that was born in their lab, that their role must change over time and evolve with the company. That to me is one of the most key things that to go back to what Camille was saying. She was fortunate with a professor who happened to already know that and sense that and feel that. And we certainly have many professors that I would say are entrepreneurs in professors' clothing. But not everybody is like that, and that is something that as a fellow mentor, I try to help both sides of that. I try to help the entrepreneur and working with their professors, and I try to talk to the professors and help them with that evolved thinking in the name of success of the company.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And thank you for that clarification. I think many of us fall into the perhaps wrong thinking of seeing more purse strings than guidance and growth. And so that's a very useful corrective. And thank you very much for your comments. I do want to switch gears ever so slightly and talk about the actual thing. I think many of us who come from an academic hardware background are obsessed with our thing, whether it's a widget, a device, a material, a sensor. And, many of us may have, whatever ideas we have about entrepreneurship may come from, maybe the more software side, where iterations can be made very quickly. You can pass out different versions of your product to different customer bases as a way of validating assumptions. But many of us know all too well that in the hardware realm, that's not always super viable, and that's not always practical to make different versions of a product. MVPs can take a long time to build and a long time to get mature. So to you first, Camille, just how have you dealt with that tension of, this kind of, maybe longer time horizons and higher capital expense to get, MVP or versions of a product going, and then, does that mean that you're very judicious about what you build, or do you try to just do a broad spectrum build? How do you navigate that?
I think it would be first really helpful to describe what our technology is.
Yes, that's good.
Context. So for us, we had studied these amazing color changing animals. We were able to isolate from their systems a key pigment that we call xanthochrome. We have switched completely from relying on animal material and have a biomimetic version of this. What we found was this molecule is extremely multifunctional. We started to focus on our commercial goods in skincare, and we found that this molecule is not only able to scatter a broad range of light, but can also absorb light. In addition, it's a powerful antioxidant. And so with these key features, we wanted to see how can we fit this into a product that could be used to address both cosmetic and chronic skin conditions, providing both protective and restorative properties through the absorption as well as the antioxidant functionality. And so because this is a totally new ingredient, has never been used for this application, we decided to prioritize our safety and performance studies prior to going towards a product development. And so in the early stages, we did a lot of preclinical testing to make sure that there were no adverse effects. So looking at irritation, looking at biocompatibility, does this lead to any kind of cell death or other downside effects on DNA mutations and systemic toxicities. And so we were really, really pleased with the results of our preclinical studies, having showcased that we had a great range that we could apply our additive across for concentration, and now have transitioned toward looking at some of the performance aspects of the molecule in our human studies. Prior to going to the human studies, we had to create a vehicle to be able to really package our ingredient that can be used as a new topical. And so for us, that is how we start to think about building out our team and pulling in the right people who would be able to support us in this effort. And so our first hires were formulation scientists that came into our team. And so I do have a prototype next to me. This is like one of our creams here. And so when it comes to early product formulation or early MVP, we just first focus on the safety. Once we got the check mark, then we started to focus on the packaging, which is going to be some types of formulation. And the next step is being able to study the efficacy through our clinical studies that we have ongoing. And so for us, when we started thinking about it, we were less concerned with, okay, this is going to take a long time, longer than just something that's existing in the market. Instead of being focused on acceleration, we wanted to do our diligence to make sure that whatever additive we're bringing to the market was in fact really safe and had really great claims that could be around it. And so for us, that has always been our driver as a technology-backed skincare company, to really make sure that we are getting robust data to support its use in this space.
Excellent, and that tackled multiple questions in addition to how do you think about hiring, and it sounds like just from what you're saying, it's very mission driven ultimately in terms of finding talent, which is great. Adam, from your side of helping to grow companies, how do you advise this idea of technology and showing a product or some hint of a product and how that can sometimes maybe even be a distraction or it can be a help, and just how do you think about the physical thing when you're advising and growing your companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you alluded to something earlier, which is, the transition or the difference between, software-like companies and those with, as you said, kind of hard tech, deep tech, tough tech, widgets and physically manufactured product. And essentially, if you take a step back for a moment and you look at kind of, what startups are trying to do in creating something that's innovative that disrupts the landscape, whether it's in a software model, whether it's in biotech, or whether it's in deep tech. Essentially, one thing that is a common weave through the whole thing is through the evolution of the company, what you're really doing is always risk mitigation, right? That's the name of the game. You're just trying to constantly remove risk and do so methodically. In biotech, it's through a phase 1 study that shows that you can, prove safety, and then there's a phase 2 study that you can show some sign of efficacy and so forth. In software, it's about some sort of iteration of a product that allows you to do alpha, beta, whatever, until you get the product just so, right? So in deep tech, it's no different. Right? It's just like you said, it's just different. But it's no different from the sense of what you're trying to do. You're still trying to mitigate risk. It's just a different flavor of it. So in deep tech, really what you try to focus on initially is IP, right? Your foundation has to be IP, because unlike other areas where you can just have a competitive advantage in the market, in deep tech, it's almost implied that you have something that's fundamentally difficult and challenging, and that you need to develop, and so you need to protect that as an asset. So developing IP is instrumental, and we'll come back to that in a bit. The second stage is productization of that IP into a proof of concept. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to get to the point yet of an actual product that's an MVP or no, just showing that you can manifest the technology into a product that has functionality is the next stage. And then the third stage is then product market fit. That the market or the opportunity or the need or the pain point that you've identified can now be served by this product in a manifestation, because there could be very many manifestations of your technology in product forms, in a manifestation that actually does that, in a business model that actually does that. So to me, it's really about taking a methodical approach towards removing risk, mitigating risk, and deep tech is really no different.
That's just wonderful, and thank you for that perspective or that lens really of risk mitigation versus what should I be building, just kind of abstractly. I think that's an important takeaway, and thank you once again for nicely segueing us to our next conversational topic, which I'm sure many people have maybe worried about if they're considering doing a startup from academia. And this is this question around IP, intellectual property. So just Camille, to you first, how have you managed intellectual property in your project? who owns it? When did you decide to file? Just run us through some of these mechanics, because I think people will appreciate that level of granularity.
Great. So when we started this venture, it was just a venture as a part of NSF I-Corps. Upon getting great mentorship through the other mentors within the program, we started to realize that there was a lot of commercial opportunities for our ingredient beyond skincare. So we started filing our first provisionals within that first month of the program. So in September, I think it was like September 25th of 2017, we filed our first two provisionals. A couple months later, we started to file other provisionals that allowed us to protect the spaces that we were going to pursue in the future. We ultimately converted that to full applications for our early work while I was still at the university. Upon leaving the university and starting C Spire, we have gotten options towards that IP. And then C Spire has filed its own IP. And so we're building on our own portfolio as well while still maintaining these relationships with Layla's lab. Allows us to also pursue in the future other opportunities to license and get options to further innovations in regards to other subject areas beyond skincare, which is our primary focus right now at C Spire. So initially we filed at the university, but then we have since grown our own portfolio or growing our portfolio at C Spire.
Excellent. And Adam, is that a common trajectory for the startups that you work with, that the intellectual property kind of begins with the university, they kind of own it, but then there is this kind of hybrid of licensing and development of subsequent IP?
Yes. So, I'll first say that this is actually the mainstay of what Material Impact does. I would say if you look at our portfolio, probably at least 3/4, maybe north of that, are companies that spun out of university settings. And a big chunk of those, I would say, are ones in which we were actively involved in helping the entrepreneur spin the technology out of a university setting. So it's something that we're very familiar with. And, I'll take a step back for a minute, Sean, if you allow me to, and just say, when you really look at, it's not just IP is important, and we'll talk about that. But when you look at what do VCs really look for in terms of a spinning out a startup from academia? There are, I would say, two categories. You have VCs at large who sometimes want to see a very, a clear product focus, not a technology platform, right? They want to see a product focus with a clear plan and, some idea of how that translates into shareholder value within a certain amount of time, and they can run it through their models and so forth. And that's a little bit different for us, actually. That would be important for us too, if it's a de novo space in which we haven't created our own thesis. But most of the time when we're involved with startups from academia, we actually have already had a thesis that identifies a problem and a pain point in a certain market or industry that we feel is really important. And we use that as our compass to then look through technology solutions in the academic setting. And sometimes we'll find one that is working on a completely different application or no application at all. And that's fine. As long as we see the peanut butter meets the chocolate, we're willing to do that. So for us, we're not as married to, it needs to be product focused from the get-go. Okay. But then comes your question. The state of the IP is very, very important. Okay. And especially if it's something that we're licensing out of academia, one of the things that I will make me walk away is if there are egregious terms of IP that is in its infancy. University licensing offices sometimes will treat a provisional patent application the same way that they would treat a family of patents that have been allowed and have a long runway. And that's, I'm as an investor, I'm not willing to have egregious terms on whether it's royalties and equity and this and that for provisionals. Okay, I could do that. so the state of the IP is important, and the licensing terms have to be very commensurate to that state of IP. And then it gets to something that you actually covered earlier, which is the founding professor has to be willing to let go of the operations and wanting to be in a state of mind to partner with the next group that he hands the baton to, or she hands the baton to, right?
Thanks.
So, to be able to really work shoulder to shoulder with each other. And the final thing I'll mention is, I know that we got Mark joining us here, so I'll try to keep this pretty quick. Is the right timing of when to even spin something out of an academic setting. And I'm going to give a view that may be a little bit contrarian, and that view is stay in the lab as long as you can. Okay? And I know that may be a little bit counter other people's opinions and advice, but you get a workspace, you get access to equipment, you get access to an entire ecosystem with technology, thought leadership. You get access to hungry grad students and postdocs that you can recruit as part of a lean team. You leave the lab when you have an opportunity cost in front of you. That's when you should trigger to leave the lab. The opportunity cost comes at the price of, let's say, developing your own IP, like Camille just mentioned. When you have the opportunity to develop your own IP that's very specific, you say, okay, maybe it's time to leave now, because if I'm developing that IP within the lab, then it's part of the university ownership. If you have access to ready now capital with financial investors, not you're going to go out. If you have access to ready now, okay, that's another trigger point. If you have access to strategic partnerships with large corporates don't like to deal with universities. They prefer to deal with companies. So that's another trigger that, okay, maybe it's time. But if it's not for the opportunity cost to do any of those things, stay in the lab as long as you can. That's my advice.
Wonderful advice and wonderful wisdom. That was, I found myself taking down notes too, so thank you for that. And yes, very much a big welcome to Mark. The saying "better late than never" has never been truer in this moment. So
I'm so sorry.
Welcome to this panel.
I'm so sorry. Our IT guy found what the problem was. Probably don't need to go into that at this point.
That's fine.
Do I have just a minute to say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe you probably didn't need my advice anyway. I had the strangest kind of company. First of all, I didn't start as a graduate student. I was already a tenured professor for 15 years. And, I was at that age, my mid 40s, when I needed to do something different. And that was as big a motivation as anything. There was an aha event when we took our robots out of the lab to a movie set out in Hollywood for the movie Rising Sun. And nothing worked. And we did eventually get it working, but we learned that, it's one thing to have a prototype in the lab, and it's another thing to have it in the world. And that got the wheels turning that eventually led to starting the company. We were strange. We had no investors for, I think, 20-something years until we sold it to Google. We had no business plan, no products really at that point, no PR department, and no MBAs. So we did everything wrong. But we're still here, and I think the thing we did right is we did what we loved the whole time. I love doing the technical work we're doing, and most of the people here do, and that's really had a lot of influence on the various decisions we've made and the path we've taken.
I've got to tell you, Mark, that when I was running a business for the medicines company, we had an office in Waltham in the parking lot, where I would veer out of my window and see your robots running around, and I would just veer in great fascination, saying, "Wow, look at this! This is so cool." So I just had to mention that I had the first-hand experience of watching your robots in action early on.
Great, thanks.
And on that point, maybe a couple last questions. So to you, Mark, one of our earlier discussions was how do you walk this tightrope between exploration, this essentially core academic mindset, and a more product focus and objectivity focus and mission focus. And we had some great responses that it really just, it depends on the flavor, it depends on the mission. Some missions will require a clearer and more sustained link with academia, as Camille was saying, and also Adam. So I guess from your perspective, how have you guys navigated that approach between more exploratory and focus?
It's a great question, and it's very topical for where we are now. We just changed hands. We're in Hyundai now, and we're working very actively to come up with the right balance, both for the desires of people here, the desires of our owner, and what we think will be effective getting our products out. But for many years, the answer to that question was that our business was to sell projects. And then the project would be the definition of almost everything we did. And the scope of what we were going to do was defined in the project. In other words, most of the technical work was just working towards the end of getting a deliverable result that met the needs of the contract. The organization of the company in terms of who we had on projects was governed by the budgets of the projects. The scope was determined by the budget of the projects. And so having a project-oriented company where there's an outside customer for a sizable piece of work can be a focusing mechanism. It's probably different than most startups that have investors and a product they're trying to launch, but that's how we did it for many years.
Great, that's very clear. And I guess just with the last few minutes that we have here, unless we have some questions. Oh, yeah, we do have a question from the audience. So, yeah, great. So we have a question from a college professor who mentors or has an entrepreneurship table where students gather bi-monthly to develop as entrepreneurs. What advice would you have as he guides and mentors them on their founder journey? So these are, groups of students. I think that's a great question for us, for the panel to answer generally. Excellent, thank you very much. And I would maybe broaden that out to graduate students as well, obviously, who are doing research in the lab. So maybe first to you, Camille.
I would say what advice to share with them, to be brave and to be courageous. And I've really appreciated what Adam mentioned, is being able to have the right timing in regards to knowing when to start. So once you identify that you have the bug, that is the first step. And being able to start making the pathway towards what does that execution look like, pulling in the right mentors, being able to do as much groundwork, because it was always relayed to me very early on that companies, clinicians, experts are really interested in supporting students. But when you transition to the next step, being a company, sometimes it's not as free-flowing, the mentorship and the type of information. So I would say utilize this time to be able to learn as much as you can about the industry that you're trying to enter into. Gather your mentors, start thinking about how you would want to really support this effort, whether that be through government grants or different types of investment structures, and really try to use this time to map it out. Almost in the best case scenario, if I had X number of dollars, what would be the first thing that I would do? Put that as your activity that drives you forward as you start thinking about your idea. That would be my advice. But mainly be brave and go for it would be my first step. But the second thing is to make sure when you're going for it that you're really diligent about your plan for execution.
Wonderful. Just in the interest of time, I think we will, it seems like we will get out of this chat very soon. So maybe our moderator will come up and tell me if that's the case, or if we have time for one more question from the audience. Okay.
Hi, Sean. Yeah, you can take a couple more questions. That's fine.
Okay, great, wonderful. So we do have one more question, which I do think is a very practical question here regarding how are you supposed to live when you start this entrepreneurship journey? Do you? So the question here is, how does money and equity work during the development and commercialization process? Is the founder meant to develop is the founder meant to expect to live off the graduate student's income while giving off major equities? I think in essence, the question is about, how does one live? What's the realities in terms of, funding oneself and sustaining oneself during this time. So maybe let's go to Adam, I guess, maybe through your experience with growing companies, what has been your experience as to how people have basically made a living? Have they double dipped? Have they survived off their graduate student salary? How has that worked?
So if you don't mind, Sean, I'm going to go off script for a second.
Great.
Because the last question I also wanted to just weigh in on, because I think it's an important one. If you don't mind, then we can go back to this, and I'm sure Mark.
Please go for it.
Can also weigh in. There's one answer that I wanted to give as well in terms of advice for graduate students who are thinking about spinning out a company from an academic setting, and that is immersion. Okay, immerse yourself in the problem in its practical setting. So what I mean by that is, as mathematicians, we all know that any theoretical solution has any equation has no solution unless you apply boundary constraints to it. Okay, the same thing in real life here. Whether if you're developing, let's say, a new medical device, if you're developing a new industrial piece of equipment, if you're developing a new digital technology for sales, facilitation, spend time immersing yourself in the field. If it's medical, go and track the patient care continuum, see all the stakeholders, what they do, shadow the nurses, shadow the doctors, shadow the payers, understand every aspect of what you're trying to, get a 360 view on the problem. If it's a piece of capital equipment in an industrial setting, go to the factory floor, watch the machinists in action, look at the supply chain, get to understand the problem. If it's a sales tool, go out and shadow and spend time being a salesperson and see what it's like on the front lines to sell something.
Another way to say that is the technical solution is only a small part of the whole of being successful. All that constraints and marketing, accommodating the customer's concerns, that's all adds up to a lot, and it's at least as important as the technical thing that you may have done in grad school that you're working on.
Absolutely.
I have an answer to this question too, the first question too, which is I think good advice would be to tell a new entrepreneur that every company is different and there's no cookie cutter thing they should be doing. Or if they're breaking some of the rules, that's it might be okay. Every company is different and they need to figure out what solution is the right one for them. That's sort of be brave, also a be brave answer.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And lastly, I guess, Adam, I think you mentioned having some comments on the second, and Mark, feel free to comment on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll just, I don't think there's a magic or crystal ball answer here. I think that there's a period of time in that bootstrap pre-seed stage where an entrepreneur is going to have to go through some turbulent times until they raise enough funding to really pay themselves and to start to, that's the way it is. And so I think being scrappy and combined with trying to get, whether it's friends and family support, whether it's non-dilutive funding support, whether it's strategic partnership, NRE dollars to help you catch as catch can through that early turbulent phase. Once you get the first round of pre-seed money, I, as an investor, actually insist that the founders pay themselves, and I've actually worked with founders who get so scrappy that they pay themselves so under market because they're trying to save every dollar for the variable expenses of their project, which I salute, but I tell them that's not sustainable, and you got to pay yourself, and you got to make sure that you're in this for the long haul. We're running a marathon, not a sprint here. So, but there is that sprint section where you just have to believe, and through willpower and the ecosystem around you, muscle through it.
Excellent. And maybe Camille, maybe a last word on that if you have any comments, but don't feel obligated.
I would just echo that completely. I would say that there's definitely opportunities if you are applying to non-dilutive funds where they do offer some support for the entrepreneur, but definitely you should pay yourself, but also recognize that pay so you can live and be comfortable so you can focus on your job, but you're not going to be making market. And understand that when you go into entrepreneurship, it shouldn't be about the dollars. It should be about the innovation. It should be about building your organization from the ground up and knowing that in time you will get to a positioning where it will satisfy your dollars and your passion.
Great. I think that's all from us. This has been a really, really profitable time. Andy, I'm not sure if you have any final comments.
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, I just want to thank our panelists, especially for spending a little extra time with us today. You know, and I'd like to thank also the rest of Startup Boston for doing this. We're 100% volunteer run, as are our speakers here. So give them a little virtual, you know, hand of applause, and yourselves for coming out. We hope you learned a lot, and we hope that you'll continue to learn a lot. We have tons more sessions throughout this week, which you can check out by going to the agenda tab and seeing both today, tomorrow, the next day, all the way through Friday. So goodbye for now. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
John,
you
for
all.
moderating. Take care, guys.